Hello, it's Patricia Warby from Alchemy Therapies here, and today I want to talk about your life's task or purpose and how that might relate to your physical and emotional health. Now, it might seem a strange topic for somebody who works with chronic fatigue syndrome, all forms of chronic anxiety and pain, but actually it's central to why we get ill and how to recover. And I was very excited to come across a talk by Dr. James Hollis, who is, well, he's a psychiatrist, I believe, somebody who's been very involved in psychology for a long, long time, but he also is very learned and very well read in the classics, which I don't have a classics education, so I'm kind of catching up on lots of this, but bear with me. This has a lot of relevance to that wonderful bridging divide between science and spirituality, because make no mistake about it, when you have a long-term chronic condition of any kind, it's usually because it's a crisis of a spiritual nature in your life. All right. And we're so used to thinking it's a malfunctioning part of our body or mind that we just seek to fix the problem without actually looking at the underlying root causes. And so I'm really here to broaden that dialogue. And I'm going to quote extensively from Dr. James's presentation for the Weekend University, and I will include in the description below the original talk, because I think to get it from the horse's mouth, as it were, is probably worthwhile if you're really interested in this subject. But here, for what it's worth, is my kind of summary and also my interpretation based on the kinds of things that come up in the clinic that I work with, working with people with chronic fatigue syndrome and anxiety. So the first thing is, often people come to me in states of huge distress. And what I say to them is, we're not just here to fix the problem, to cure the pain or the anxiety or the fatigue. We're here to look at who you really are, which often scares people because it's a bigger question, isn't it? Who am I? Who am I here to be? And so it feels to me like that's a central question in any recovery story. And the reason I think it comes up is because the body doesn't have any other way really of communicating its distress to you other than to create symptoms. And so that's something I've covered extensively on this channel, but I definitely want to go deeper here. Now, James, he's in his 80s. He's had an extensive life, and I think that's important. He's learned a lot along the way. Not too long ago, he had a bit of a cancer scare as well. So it's not like he hasn't experienced suffering, okay? Because any life has a degree of suffering in it. It's how you respond to the suffering that matters. Do you just go about it thinking, well, I'll just get through this and, I'll fight it, as many people do? Or do you take time to just take a moment and have a think about where you are currently in your life and where it might be out of alignment? Now, the question that was posed to James in this video, is there a purposeful intelligence in nature that kind of is directing the show? And he commented that he agreed with that absolutely there was. And this is being shown by a lot of researchers now in science, that agency and intelligence exists even at the cellular and subcellular levels in our bodies and in the cosmos as a whole. So that's definitely true. How does it operate in our bodies? And what's the meaning of that for us? And he quotes a lot from Carl Jung, who, when asked about what was the grand summation of his life, he said he had no major conclusions other than, I'm the same person I always was, even with all the things that he'd been through. There's a continuity, something inside that doesn't change. And he called that the self with a capital S. And I would say the same. I would say I'm the same person I was as a child. I have a lot more experience. I have a lot more, there's a lot more having gone on in my life now that has taught me things. But my essential self, this guiding inner spirit, if you like, is the same as it was then. And the question my life is about, why I'm here, is what is it that wants to live through me? Who am I here to be and I'm very careful to say be, not do, because we're currently focused on how much we can do, which is often tied in with achievement, which is part of the old programming. I'll come on to that in a moment. But being is a different thing altogether. It's who am I? Who am I being in this moment when I turn up, when I engage with people, when I live my life? And that's a very deep and important question. Am I living according to my own values? Am I indeed valuing myself? Or do I find myself insufficient in some way? Do I judge myself internally? Now, these are things that people don't often do consciously. They often do them in unconscious ways by, let's be honest, undermining ourselves, making decisions about relationships or jobs or finances that actually are destined to fail. We may do it through procrastination, through holding back making decisions, because it's easier just to avoid that altogether. Because subtly under the hood, you are believing yourself insufficient or inadequate. And so it's much easier to stay safe, isn't it, and not do something. So it's a central question, and it comes about really because as part of growing up, when you're surrounded by people who supposedly are wise and all-knowing, usually parents and teachers and other people influencing you in your environment, you find actually you have to adapt. So growth and development is really all about a process of adaptation in order to survive in the environment you grew up in. And so you often carry a lot of baggage from that, a lot of beliefs and structures that you maybe never questioned about who you are in this world. And the less connected you are to the essential self, who you truly are in this world, what lights you up, the more likely you are to get a job or a partner or anything external in life that fits this externalized notion of who you are, this adapted self, than the one that you truly are inside. And so that is what I try and uncover, literally, just stripping away some of these layers of belief when we're working together. It might sound painful, but it's actually revelatory for many, many people to find out when they were 5 or 6, all they wanted to do was dance or write or draw. And now they're in, the corporate world and they've become very successful, but it's entirely meaningless for them because it isn't reflecting in the outer world how they feel inside. And so James says that the more you adapt to the outer world, the less connected you are to the inner. And I think that's very, very true. And certainly he gives an example from his own life of hitting 35 and, everything external he'd achieved. He'd become a professor, I think, and, he'd escaped his childhood home and achieved great plaudits in his intellectual life. But he felt profoundly depressed. And why was this? And luckily, because of the kind of field he's in, he was able to get help. He went into analytical therapy and found that there was some part of him that wasn't being expressed. And so this is really, really important to find out. And it's never too late, I should say, as well. It doesn't matter whether you're 7 or 70. There are ways of finding these things inside by literally being curious and open to what it is your psyche, and James defines that as the expression of the soul. It's not a mental process. It's a much deeper concept than that. What your psyche is trying to express externally for you through the internal awareness that you've been denying. And so don't forget, we will favor safety over exploration, because when we grow up, we feel very vulnerable. We feel very subject to other people's whims and decisions. And, childhood is honestly, it's the definition of vulnerability, really. We're small, we have no agency, we can't decide for ourselves where we live or how we grow up. And we often take those adaptations with us into adult life, and they become self-limiting. They become a great problem because they've never been examined as whether they're true for us or not. And so he calls this developing ego strength. Okay, so that's the first half of our lives is really about individuation, becoming ourselves, but it's usually an adaptive self. And then, developing that ego strength to step into the world, to create relationships, career, parenting, your civil responsibilities, and so on. But at some point in one's life, and it happened to me, as well, it may come about why, the question may arise, why am I really here? Who am I? Is this what it's really about? For me, that was working in education, which I loved, but I was in a very corporate environment at a university, and it was like, really, is this really what I'm here for? I thought I was going to make a difference. I had a very external view of what that would mean. It would be, inventing something or creating something entirely new and saving the world. And instead, I was just, I'd like to say I was a pen pusher, but it's more like emails. But it's definitely a job that didn't light me up. It was certainly something I could do, and I was very competent at it. But eventually, it kind of got to a point where I just didn't find it was doing anything for me at a deeper level. And so I signed up to do a PhD. That's what I wanted to do. That's how my left hemisphere, very dominant, right, fix it, solve the problem, sign up to do something. So I decided to study clinical psychology and hypnotherapy. And I looked at the traumatic drivers of chronic pain, which was really, really interesting. But it still didn't solve the essential problem. Who am I? What am I here to be? And he uses another example, James, of Tolstoy, the writer who wrote, I think it's the Life and Death of Ivan Ilyich. The Death of Ivan Ilyich, published in 1885. All right, now I've not read that book, but I know it's one that many people refer to as a great literary work. Who in the last 3 days of his life, in the story, he had a terminal illness, suddenly decides he's got to look inside and find out what it is that he is and why his life has been the way it has. And so it's a short story. It isn't hugely long, but it is a very meaningful analysis of 3 days of suffering, where the one thing about suffering is when it comes along, it forces you to have an honest conversation with yourself. And why am I here? What is it I'm doing? And the reason why most of us fail to follow the innate understanding of ourselves, our soul, is that we get in our own way. We lack permission to take that understanding, that knowing, that inner feeling of self seriously. We may even rationalize it away, as I did. It's really about denying self-respect, because if you respect your understanding of who you are, you just will enact it. You will put it into action. If you really trust it as an inner voice that deserves and needs to be expressed in your life, then illness, I'm not saying you won't ever be ill, but those kind of long-term chronic conditions, which are as a result of this denial of the self, just have no need to be there and will resolve themselves. And so if you look at actually the meaning of the word psyche, okay, I always thought so psyche is to do with psychological, it's to do with thinking and the brain, but no, it has a deeper meaning. It is really about the soul's understanding of you, okay, because we're not just physical beings, we're energetic beings in a physical body. We may in fact be physically adult, but we may be psychologically children. If we've not completed this inner quest, if you like, to find ourselves and discover what it is about us that is trying to be expressed. And as a result of that, we live very adapted, partial, and sometimes truncated lives, because when we don't listen to the force of the psyche, illness comes along to kind of absolutely put in our way the major block. It will say, right, you can't do this anymore. you have to stop. So it becomes a massive roadblock. And it's probably the only thing that many people will listen to is being ill. Okay, so it's a painful point in many people's lives when they get to the point where they can't operate as they have been doing. It forces us to realign and to find out, are we living our true life, or perhaps are we living the unlived life of a parent? That's a very common experience when I work with people, is that people have adapted to the point where, in order to be safe and loved as children, they've taken on the values and belief systems of their parents. And if their parents had a degree of suffering too, those beliefs are likely to be rather traumatic. They may adapt to that and become very hardworking, very, very directional. But that doesn't mean it's true for that person. It's an adaptation. And so, learning to live courageously and not timidly is about questioning the values of your parents, which can be really, really tough, because it feels like a betrayal. It feels like we're ungrateful for what they sacrificed to bring us up. And so many people find that a difficult thing, to kind of naturally reject the values of the parent, but they absolutely have to in order to find their own. And so that's a really crucial point when you're working through some of these issues. We have to get out of these small and adapted lives that have become safe in order to feel courageously present in our own. Now, that doesn't always lead to a major illness, but there's usually a crisis point in everybody's lives where you'll be forced to wake up and do something differently. Maybe it's the ending of a long-term relationship or a financial disaster. There's usually a reason why people have to make this leap forward. And James describes in his own life, as I've said, and I think it's given him a great deal of inner wisdom. And wisdom is not the same as knowledge. Knowledge, I think, is acquiring facts and data. As I said, a previous talk that I analysed with Father Sean at Lyre, he was talking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I agreed with him. Wisdom is kind of something you apply. It's something you deeply know, but it's not just the facts, it's how you put them into action. And so life's highway is really about acquiring wisdom, not more facts. And, if life is going to teach us anything, it's going to course correct. So if we're not living a life according to our deepest desires from a psychological or spiritual point of view, then it's going to interrupt us. And that's where the second half of life begins. And this again concurs with other theorists who talked about the second mountain in your life. The first mountain is going out into the world and being and, attaining things and achieving. And this second half of your life, which can, by the way, happen at any age, it doesn't necessarily mean chronologically, is where you go inside and you find perhaps deeper meanings for yourself. And it may be that you reject the culture that you're in, for instance, as Father Lyra had to do, because he was excommunicated from the church. So he was found to be outside the regimented structures of the Catholic Church. And then he created his own theology and his own, what he calls personal cosmology. And I think many of us are kind of working towards that. So in the second phase of my life, I'm now working as a therapist where I help people uncover these unknown selves that live within them. And what a joy that is. It gives me a great deal of, I guess, happiness, because I know I'm using what happened to me and what was so difficult for me in a positive way. Now, I think if we look at the word psychopathology, I thought this was really interesting, the definition of which means the expression of the suffering of the soul. Okay, so if we take that definition as true, then anything that comes up, whether mentally or physically, is an expression of deep inner suffering. And that has to be not just eliminated, not just fixed, but examined with curiosity, with a willingness to go within and find the mystery of life and the awe, which is largely absent from current culture, which is all about immediate gratification and quick fixes, as we see politically and personally. So I think it's a time to stop running, a time to stop and pay attention to ourselves, ask ourselves the question, do you give yourself permission to be you, to feel what you really feel, and to take your dreams seriously? Many of the people I work with are in a process of denial because, as I say, it doesn't fit the values they grew up with. And so they will honestly say, no, I can't do that. Every time I try, it feels awful. Well, it does, because it's contrary to what you were taught. And until you're ready to stand up and, argue your case for who you are and what you believe, then you will just carry on doing what everybody else wants for you. And this isn't just selfish. It's not narcissism. When it comes from the soul, it's a deep exploration and expression of truth. And I think it gives other people permission too, when you give yourself permission to live authentically. And this is something Gabor Mate talks a lot about. Authenticity is a really strong and important drive, and it's probably my top value, which is why I'm doing this. So, is it time? Is it time for you to really individuate, to become yourself? Not just to have achieved things in life, but to find your way as a true spiritually developed human being. And yeah, that's the question I ask. Now, a final point, purposeful intelligence. Okay, let's just understand this. You are composed of the same atoms, the same particles that actually construct the entire universe. And as human beings, we have an interplay with the universe energetically, because we're in the center of the cosmos, in the sense of, at a scale from the very large to the very small. It just so happens, logarithmically, the human being sits right bang in the center of that scale. Now, I find that fascinating. I explored that in my book, The Mystery of Number. And it suggests to me that we communicate both below and above, so with the smaller and the larger, that we have an interaction that not only creates a better life for ourselves, or could do, but imprints in the universal energy field a sense of possibility. And so it is about a positive intention, but it's more than that. It's more than, you've heard about the law of attraction and so on. It's more than, imagining a beautiful Maserati on your drive or a check for $40,000. It's much more about imprinting a sense of growth and possibility in the matrix, in the field in which we're embedded. And so I do feel there is a purposeful intelligence, and I do feel that illness or disease, dis-ease, can come along at any moment to course correct us back to the truth of who we are and what we're here to be. And I would say that's probably the most important thing I learned in my journey, and what I hope to transmit to other people. Respect for the body, treating ourselves well, physically as well as emotionally, because after all, this is the vehicle, and our soul, I guess, is part of that. It's part of our organ of continuity, as Dr. Hollis says. And there is something in you that is your unique gift to the world. And that's what I'd like to ask you, is what's yours? Please, if you find any of this interesting and want to come and have a discovery call with me, or find out a bit more about my books and my courses, you can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. Take care out there, and speak soon. Bye-bye.